What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Magic Mushroom Speaks podcast. On this episode, we have a very special guest named Dr. Powers from the Temple of Shroom Discord. He has an MD, he's a neurosurgeon with a master's in science in medical cannabis and therapeutics, and he has 9+ years in psychedelic research. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Powers to the show. We're just waiting on him to come into the show now, and then
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. This is Dr. Powers?
Yeah, hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Yeah, I didn't notice the name on there, so.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out how the hell to edit it. I just, I did one of those one-click registrations, and it just assigned me that name.
Yeah, we're kind of going out on a whim here anyway, so that's all right.
Oh,
So
man,
how's
so
your,
good.
how's
Yeah,
your
no,
morning
no,
going?
doing well. I came back in late this early, or I guess early this morning, because I was hanging out with a friend that I haven't seen in a little while. So we were just doing kind of the boys' night in, watching hockey, watching movies. And next thing you know, I'm looking at my phone and it says almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I was like, oh shit, I gotta get home.
Yeah, one of those nights, huh?
Yeah, no, it was good though, because both of us we're both social people, but we much prefer just hanging out at home. And he's had some medical issues recently, so it was the perfect excuse to just hang out and get away from everybody, and it was good. I think we both needed it.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. For the listeners, let's hear a little bit about yourself, your background, what got you into psychedelics, stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, fair warning, I have a pretty convoluted origin story, but everything seems to have worked out in my favor to get me to where I am today. So, I guess from the beginning, I am a first generation immigrant. We moved to the United States when first time when I was 4, and then permanently when I was 12. But I pretty much I grew up here, so I'm an American citizen. I was in the Navy. Red, white, and blue runs through my veins, like pretty much every other American. But flashing forward, I uh, received a congressional nomination to the United States Naval Academy, so that's where I went to college. I was an information warfare, information technology major, and then I unfortunately was medically discharged, so I finished up at a local state school. I ended up with a dual Bachelor of Science for biology and chemistry. I knew that I wanted to go to medical school, and frankly speaking, I had absolutely no real guidance. So I just figured, well, doctors need hard sciences, so let me major in hard sciences. And that was probably my first big mistake. um, if you actually know anything about medical school admissions, the number one major that has the best success rate of getting in is actually English. So for anyone listening with kids that are, high school age and you want to give them good advice about what to major in, tell them to just major in whatever they find interesting. Don't pick a major just because you think that that's what your career needs. Because, spoiler alert, nobody really gives a shit about your undergrad anymore. So just do whatever you want. Make sure it's something you can get an easy A in.
Yeah.
No, man. But my original academic interests in, we'll call them, essentially anything other than the normal pharmaceutical drugs. So, like, my first love was cannabis, and I fortunately slash unfortunately, probably more unfortunately, never got to experience really anything until I was, well out of medical school, well out of training. And what I mean by that is, like trying any psychedelics or cannabis. And that was because I have a lot of PTSD and a lot of paranoia, thinking that people are always watching me, and B, I had to maintain a security clearance, and you do anything and they revoke it. So for the longest time, I could never try anything. But back in 2005, I had the opportunity to join a lab that was doing some of the first research based on the Department of Defense patent filings, where I don't know if folks know this, but they actually patented uh, cannabinoids as neuroprotectants. So that's where I actually got my first start in the world of cannabis, and eventually I would bring that out into psychedelics. But that's flashing forward about 8 or 9 years. I ended up going to medical school after working for 3 years. I took a 3-year break. I was just working, saving money. And then I paid my way through graduate school, medical school. And I eventually started doing neurological surgery. So for a guy that had a tough time getting into medical school, I ended up achieving my lifelong dream of getting into one of the hardest specialties in all of medicine, in neurosurgery. And I ended up specializing in neurotrauma, spine trauma, and neurocritical care. So that's a lot of my personal interest, because I have a lot of head injuries, and that very much factors into why I research what I research, because I want to see how I can protect the brain. So, yeah, no, it's been a long, winding road, and somewhere in there, approximately a little over 9 years ago, I started doing some neuroanatomical research, looking at this area of the brain, or it's not really an area of the brain. It's a bunch of interrelated centers of the brain called the default mode network, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But long story short, it turns out the default mode network plays a central role in not only decision making in humans, but more importantly, how, or more relevant, I should say, how psychedelics themselves actually interact in the brain. So I came into psychedelic research, kind of ass backwards. It just sparked my interest, and then I started discovering, hey, there are these drugs that can actually modulate the function of this default mode network that I was just researching. And holy cow, when you do that, it turns out that you can treat a whole bunch of different disease processes. And I'm skipping a lot of stuff, but it's kind of intentional, because there's a lot of personal anguish and heartache in there. I had a few rough years. I had a sick spouse, and had to make the tough decision to leave neurosurgery. But everything in hindsight has worked out pretty darn well. We have a healthy family, and I love the work that I do. So not too bad.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And I think we need more people with your credentials looking into this, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I'm sure the community does too. It's great.
I sincerely appreciate that, and I was just thinking about this before I got on. This community, the mycology community, and more broadly, the folks that are really just starting to find out about psychedelics. It's easily been the most inclusive, the most accepting community I've ever had the chance to be a part of. Um, even with cannabis, I mean, we've seen how the cannabis industry has completely broed out. One of the biggest things about this mycology community is I have had very, very, very few interactions where I'm left saying, "Oh God, that guy's a dick." Um, it's everyone has just been. It's like you. They're just. This is the first time in my life where people, like actually want to hear what I have to think. They want to learn more. They find this stuff genuinely interesting, and it's just very refreshing. Really, for any physician nowadays to find people that actually want to listen to us. Most patients. Anytime you talk to a patient nowadays, it's almost always, well, that's not what Google said. Well, that's not what the Joe Rogan podcast said, and I heard this on a podcast. It's like, Jesus Christ, man! Like, some of us went to school for 17 years for this stuff. I'm sorry, I'm not telling you what Joe Rogan wants you to hear, but here's the truth.
Yeah, and we always need more truth, man. That's
No, it's been fantastic. I've loved every second that I've been a part of this community. So thank you for welcoming me.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, we need more people like you, like with your credentials out here educating us too, because I think a lot of us, we have a lot of those same things like the ADHD, stuff like that. And I think a lot of the community is just trying to find their own answers for the medicine, and we need guidance that like doctors can provide. So
I think one of the, at least this is me speaking for myself, but from my interactions with other physicians and other researchers, I think that this opinion is shared more broadly. But I think for me, the reason, or one of the reasons that I really enjoy this field of study and interacting with all the people in it is I think most of us are, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I don't, it more than likely has something to do with the fact that the people in these communities, or the people that are interested in this, are more open-minded. And whether that's that's an intrinsic factor to the person, or whether that's a byproduct of using these substances. But generally speaking, I find that folks aren't closed off. Like, I can tell someone that I have a different opinion, or the evidence suggests something else other than what they had in their head, and instead of being a closed off reaction, like, oh, you're telling me I'm wrong and I don't know things. Instead, it's, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. Like, could it be this? Could it be that? And it's just the sense of the this is going to sound hokey, but the sense of community when you're speaking with folks is overwhelming to me. The sense of collaboration, I should say. Instead of people being defensive, it's just more like, yeah, tell me more. Like, tell me things that I don't know. And it's very humbling and very exciting, at least from my standpoint, because I don't know if you've ever met any other doctors or researchers, but this whole attitude or thought that doctors and researchers are trying to hoard information and trying to keep secrets about things. No, if you've ever met any one of us, we want to shout it from the rooftops. We want everyone to know what we know, and it doesn't matter whether if it's something groundbreaking like psychedelics, or whether it's something completely mundane like, hey, I found the perfect recipe for plant food. It's like, we want to share our information. We don't want to hoard it.
And we want to receive it, so keep it all coming.
Yeah. Wow, man.
I'm gonna throw you right into the mix here. In your opinion, what causes like psychotic breaks during like a trip?
Yeah, so I've given this a lot of thought. The bottom line is, like, the short and the cut and dry answer is simply this: we don't actually know. We don't definitively know. But if you break it down into its components, realistically, I think what's happening is when you're taking a psychedelic substance, an entheogen and an empathogen, you're breaking down the normal barriers that the brain has established. Not the barriers. You're breaking down the normal rules of operation that the brain has. So the brain is. This is a hard concept for a lot of folks to get, but the brain is not built for happiness. The brain is built for survival. And a lot of the walls that the brain puts up in order to help us keep the world in some semblance of order, well, those walls come down when you use these substances, specifically through deactivation of the default mode network. You can think about this as the ego tries to keep us in check. Psychedelics break down the ego, so now your brain can kind of run in different directions. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is that when the person experiences their first psychotic episode, the brain is no longer able to differentiate between this is a thought and this is a belief. And so what ends up happening, like there's a, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's a movie, a documentary. It's called Psychonautics. It's a film about the comedian Shane Moss, who set out to prove that psychedelics don't cause psychosis, and he did so by taking all of the psychedelics. And guess what? He had his first psychotic break. And the thing that I think is really important for folks to understand is that psychosis is not, for the most part, it's not what we experience when we take psychedelics. Psychosis is not like, oh, the walls are warping and I'm seeing, pink elephants running across the floor. It's disordered thinking. It's where I would normally be able to tell myself, no one is following me. No one is telling me things to do. Versus psychosis, I might have intrusive thoughts that I can no longer fend off. So it's disordered thinking. It's not always, and frankly speaking, rarely, is it having to do with hallucinations. Folks do get auditory hallucinations. Those are the most common types of hallucinations. But generally speaking, like if you have bipolar disorder, your psychotic break would be delusional thoughts. It could be a manic episode. It doesn't have to be, and again, it rarely is a hallucination. It's just that the brain can no longer differentiate between your intrusive thoughts and reality. As to what actually causes that, like from a chemical standpoint, from a neuroanatomical or a psychopharmacological standpoint, we don't really know. We don't know if a concentration of psilocybin or another alkaloid at this percentage has a higher probability of triggering that psychotic episode. That's one of the things that, frankly speaking, we should really pursue in terms of academic research interests. But as like, do we know definitively what causes it? No. There's just a lot of bemused speculation by people like me when you get really high and you just start thinking about, oh, what about this? Oh, what about that? Until we can do these experiments safely, and frankly speaking, I don't know if we ever will be able to. We may never actually be able to solve that question.
And why do you feel that you might not ever be able to do that? Like,
so it's not we. So technically speaking, we absolutely could do that. It's a question of whether we should or not. And that really comes down to one of the basic principles of clinical research in general is you don't ever want to put yourself or your research subjects in a position where you are either intentionally harming them or putting them in a situation where there is a higher likelihood of them being hurt versus not hurt. So it's really from an ethical and moral standpoint of I can't, in good conscience, engage in a research study where I, as the researcher, know that there is a higher likelihood of the person being hurt than not. So, like, yes, we absolutely can do some of these studies, but should we? Because at that point, you're crossing into an area of ethics and research that we really don't want to be in. You're starting to get into, the Joseph Mengele era where, yeah, we're going to learn a lot, but we're going to maim people doing it. So folks don't ever want to hear that, these war criminals have, left or have progressed our understanding of the human body by decades. But it's true. But that being said, that doesn't mean that we should do that, because you have to think of just the scores of people that were killed, that were maimed, that were left with, unrelenting PTSD after these experiments. And same goes with mind-altering drugs. We can absolutely cause a lot of harm. People don't want to hear that about psychedelics. Yeah, we don't cause physical harm, but we can cause untold psychological harm. Just think about any challenging trip that you may have, that you've had. That's 100% real while you're going through it. You can feel your blood pressure go up. You can feel your heart rate go up. Just because it's not actually happening doesn't mean that the brain can't tell your body that it's happening. And it's a long-winded answer, but there's a lot of reasons that there's research that we shouldn't do.
Yeah, and I think that's it's like I've been like not monitoring, but going through the discords and stuff, and I think it's really dangerous because I'm seeing a lot of people that they are having those psychotic breaks, and it's how do you say it? I guess there needs to be more awareness, really, of
100%.
What could really happen. Yeah,
100%. And it's not only awareness, but it's also taking it a step further and providing it's active harm reduction. It's being able to recognize that a person is having a very difficult experience. It's being able to recognize when a person is not in the right frame of mind or the right stage of their life to embark on any of these experiences. It's having the personal fortitude to tell someone, hey man, I really don't think you're in the right place to do this right now. It's also for the younger folks realizing that, hey, my brain is still actively developing until I'm 25. I probably shouldn't use these things until my brain is fully developed. It's hard for a lot of folks, and I will be the first one to admit that it's hard for me sometimes to tell someone something that they don't want to hear. The humans, we generally speaking want to be liked. And it breaks that cardinal rule of being liked when you have to tell someone something that they don't want to hear or potentially don't want to hear. But in reality, you have to remember you're trying to help that person.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. So what's the most intriguing finding throughout your psychedelic research?
Um,
Even a couple.
personal or academic?
Nah, let's touch on the personal. Let's go a little bit of on the personal side here.
So, for me, I think probably the most interesting thing is, so again, I have a very strong cannabis background. I've been working with cannabis now for actually almost 18 years. I keep saying 16, but I guess I should update that. Almost 18 years.
Time flies.
I think probably the most interesting thing for me is drawing parallels between cannabis and we'll talk about psilocybin, because that's what I have the most experience with mushrooms in general. I have always really focused on terpenes and terpene profiles, and the more work that I do with psilocybin, the more experience I like, the more data points I get under my belt, so to speak, the more I am really starting to appreciate the nuances in different varieties. So this is a conversation that I've had numerous times with folks. There is a very strong, the way I see it, there's a very strong correlate or parallel between the alkaloid profile of a mushroom, of an active mushroom, and the terpene profile of a cannabis plant. And I think that more folks are really starting to appreciate the fact that a trip on variety A can be diametrically opposed to the experience on variety B. And it very much has to do with the differences in the alkaloid content, and more importantly, or more relevant, the alkaloid profile. So these are the substances that we're talking about, like baeocystin, norbaeocystin, norpsilocin, aeruginosin, not just psilocybin and psilocin. So all of these compounds, which frankly speaking, we're just starting to scratch the surface on, these play significant roles in the actual experience of the user. And from a neurochemical standpoint, you change, you have different effects that we can start monitoring. And that's just with alkaloids. Then you start adding different substances like harmalos, and you start talking about like ayahuasca. And I mean, all of a sudden it goes from, hey, there's 2 or 3 active drugs, to holy shit, there's like 60. And all of these things at different concentrations will drastically impact the experience. And we're just, from an academic standpoint, we're just learning about these things. So I think the future has a lot of potential to change fundamentally how we understand both how these drugs work and how the human brain works in relation to these drugs.
That's amazing stuff. I wanted to go back for a second. I had a thought here on the psychotic breaks.
Mm-hmm.
Now during that like, what would you call it? I guess, is it a process? The psychotic break, would that be a process maybe? I was just curious as to thinking, would a trip sitter be able to help through that? Like, is that why they suggest to have a trip sitter, like somebody that obviously has been around for a while and knows you as a person? Do you think that that's beneficial?
So yeah, it's unequivocally beneficial overall, but as to whether a trip setter could identify a psychotic break, not really, because you won't be able to tell while the person is under the influence of the substance whether they've had a psychotic break. It's only when the drug wears off that you can tell. And frankly speaking, so the whole purpose of a trip sitter is to hold the space for the person undergoing the psychedelic experience. So that person is there to make sure that the user is physically safe, that that no one is going to come up and mess with them while they are under the influence, that while they are under the influence, they don't act out some of the things that they're experiencing, like taking off your clothes and running into traffic, or someone that's very clearly um, altered and they want to jump in a pool. Like, so that's what a trip sitter is really for, is to make sure that that person is not going to harm themselves or harm others. The other thing that a trip sitter is really for is to provide gentle reassurance during challenging experiences. So when they see the person getting really, emotionally amped up, the trip sitter is there to not necessarily guide what's going on. Some do, but their main role is to provide reassurance through uh, you know, tactile stimulation. So holding the person's hand, rubbing their shoulder, and also verbal reassurance. Like, so not necessarily trying to influence the trip itself, but telling them things like, you are loved, you are safe, things that can help break that anxiety spiral that I think every one of us has, been through probably a bunch of times, where you just have that thought in your head that you just can't get it out, can't get it out, can't get it out. That's where you have that external reassurance saying, hey, it's okay, you're fine, you're safe. And then all of a sudden that person's anxiety breaks and they can continue through their journey. Um, the trip sitter is not equipped for, generally speaking, is not equipped for a person that has had an abrupt departure from reality. And again, you can't make that distinction while the person is under the influence of a substance, which by definition departs them from reality. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. So at that point, when someone, when a trip sitter is concerned enough about a person, their main responsibility at that point, besides taking care of the person in the immediate vicinity, in the immediate situation, is to really make note of it and make sure that the person in question has the potential resources to go seek medical and psychological help after the experience. So whether that be, I'm going to stay with the person until they come down, and then I'm just going to physically drive them to, a psychiatric facility, or I'm going to contact, the person's wife, husband, brother, boyfriend, girlfriend, grandparent, and tell them, hey, I'm really concerned about this person. I think that they should get checked out. Would you please help me? That's I think the more appropriate response.
So the psychotic break doesn't happen while you're under the influence. It's after you have come down back, I guess, back to reality, as you could say.
Well, that's when you can start delineating the person pre-trip, post-trip, and see, all right, their speech patterns are different. I can't, like, they're fixated on this one thing or these two things, or they're having delusional thought patterns. You can't, like, the actual psychotic break, more than likely happens while they are under the influence. It's just that from an external standpoint, we can't make that distinction until the person's system is cleared of the drug. Because until that drug is cleared, you can't definitively say from an external viewpoint, this is a drug effect or this is a psychiatric event. So the person themselves that's going through it can tell, or technically speaking, they can't tell because psychosis is a break from reality. So whatever's happening to them is their new reality. But the bottom line is it's essentially like a veterinarian trying to figure out what's wrong with an animal where that animal can't tell them what's wrong. So it's the same thing. It's the same type of concept.
Well, that's a good analogy. So what I wanted to touch on this a little bit. What exactly happens to the brain while on psychedelics?
A lot of stuff. It depends what you take. But let's see. There is no easy way of telling this, but so there's when you think of the human decision-making process, there are three broad networks. I'm doing air quotes here. Three broad networks that are directly implicated in this. So try to remember throughout all of this that humans are emotional beings, and what I mean by that is that emotion very much colors how we see the world, and emotion very much is intricately tied to how our brain processes the world and informs our decisions. So the whole concept of objectivity is really a fallacy of thought for humans, because our brains are not objective. Our brains are subjective. Our brains are emotional. So what ends up happening, let's say that I see a person where I'm walking on the street and I see a person walking towards me. Just that scenario. So the first network of the brain, it's called the salience emotion network. We generally refer to that as the SCOUT. This network is responsible purely for taking in visual data, auditory data, and emotional data from your world. It's just scanning everything. And the whole point of the SCOUT is to figure out which network it should funnel the information to. So the issue here is that the amygdala, which is a part of the brain that's generally responsible for the generation of fear and anxiety, has a huge part to play in the SCOUT. So why is this? Well, because the amygdala is made for survival. So if I know that there has been something in my past that has caused me pain, anguish, physical harm, well, my brain wants to be able to recognize those warning signs immediately. So anytime what ends up happening is I see that person walking down the street towards me, and I interpret the face that they're showing me as a similar face to my parents whenever they were judging me. So without ever having met this person, my brain immediately goes, that person is judging you. You need to be afraid of them. Do you follow me that far?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, so now my brain needs to decide, is this something that I need to take action on immediately, or is this something that doesn't require immediate action and I can work on autopilot? So if it's something that requires immediate action, your brain will essentially bypass what's called the default mode network and just go straight into action. So this is your knee-jerk reaction.
So it's kind of like what is that? Fight or flight? Like, is that?
The amygdala will trigger fight or flight. They're kind of different, but they're interrelated. So if it's something that I don't need to act on right away, in this case, the person's walking towards me, I don't need to really do anything other than just be myself, well, then the default mode network takes over. The default mode network is essentially the brain takes all of your collective experience and looks for patterns. So this is where that person has the same look that my father had when he scolded me. So the default mode network will look for all of those other instances in your life and say, okay, it fits this pattern. This is how you should react. And this is where you start having those thoughts in your head like, oh, that person, I bet that person is judging me. It's like when in reality, no, they're just being quiet because they don't know you. Or in reality, that person is not judging you. They have the sun in their eyes, and that's why their eyes are squinty like that. Well, when you take a psychedelic, one of the things that happens is you quiet the default mode network, that part of the brain that makes you snap judgment. So now, all of a sudden, on this drug or these compounds, instead of rushing to jumping to a conclusion, so to speak, now your brain is forced to take every input at its face value. So now, instead of that person is scowling at me and they make me feel bad, it's just, oh, there's a person walking down the street. How nice. Realistically, that's what it is. And one of the major benefits of taking psychedelics is the fact that we see that effect of quieting the default mode network tends to stick around. So we see these at differing time points. We see that a person has a slight delay in their processing because now the brain is starting to remember, hey, I don't need to jump to conclusions. I can take a beat and see that situation for exactly what it is and nothing more. And that's really realistically one of the biggest benefits, or probably the biggest benefit of psychedelics in general, is that they change from an anatomical, electrical, chemical standpoint. They change the flow of information in the brain. So now, like, I'll use myself as an example. With a history of PTSD, now instead of I hear, or I feel my phone vibrate, well, what used to send me into a panic because the phone vibration feels like my pager vibrating when I was on trauma call. And every time that pager vibrated, something bad would happen. So now, instead of having that immediate panic reaction when my phone vibrates, my brain takes a second and goes, hey, you're not carrying a pager. Nothing bad is about to happen. Or the worst that's going to happen is you're going to have someone, tell you that you need to do some menial task right away. So it gives my brain that second to just relax and say, hey, it's not the end of the world. Same thing with depression. I work with patients where we, this is one of the benefits of microdosing is long-term repeated exposure to these chemicals at small doses continually deactivate the default mode network. So now a person doesn't have that expectation that I was sad yesterday, I was sad the day before, which means that my only expectation is that I will be sad tomorrow. Now all of a sudden their brain goes, hey, we haven't been given a reason to be sad today. So maybe we just take things as they come. And then your brain, and then you, the person, go, oh shit. Yeah, that's right. This thing that affected me 20 years ago is not in front of me right now. It's just my thoughts. I'm not a slave to my thoughts. And it's just that momentary break from that, from being stuck on the railroad tracks. That's all your brain needs is just to remember that there's a different way of doing something. It's that little glimmer of hope that, hey, maybe change is good.
Yeah, for me, the psychedelics helped me kick an addiction to alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know how it did it, but I mean, it's amazing.
So, Michael Pollan has he in How to Change Your Brain. It's a fantastic book. If anybody out there hasn't read it yet, this is your indication to go pick it up. He talks about he's talking about some of these talks that he's had with different researchers, and I don't think it was Robin Carhart Harris, but it was around that section in the book where essentially he was being explained how human thought as we get older, it's like the ruts on a cart path. So you have carts that they travel the same trail over and over and over again, and over time the wheels compact the ground to a point that you form like actual rails. And yes, it makes it significantly easier for the cart to roll over those, but it also makes it significantly harder for the cart to change paths. Well, psychedelics essentially come by and level the cart path. So now there are no more grooves. So now your brain, the cart, is free to move left, right, center, up, down, because you're not constrained by those old thought patterns. That's why you see such improvement especially with substance use disorders like alcoholism, like cocaine use, like opioid use, is all of a sudden your brain now does it sees, hey, there are different things that I can do to address my inner turmoil other than I'm going to drown it with alcohol, or I'm going to numb the pain with XYZ drug. It makes it so that your brain says, okay, well, I can actually talk about these things, or I can think about these things, and they're just thoughts. It's not causing me that same level of hurt anymore. And that's not to say that the emotions that we have are not real. It's just that that's all they are. They're emotions, they're thoughts. Action is really what matters, because action is the material world, so to speak. So psychedelics really show the human brain it's just a thought. It's not the reality. And that's why these substances are showing such promise, back in the 50s and now being resurrected today.
Yeah, it's funny, as you were describing that, I was actually, in my mind, I was picturing my brain as you were talking about the cart and stuff, and I was actually imagining my brain there. And oh, it was funny. If you could only be inside the head, as
well, and that's the thing. It's tough for me to like even talk about these things, because I know what I want to say, but so like here's kind of a mind fuck, but it's a great thought experiment, or at least for me. It's it's the whole concept of reality. Like it, how do I put this? Are you paranoid if someone is actually listening to you? You know, it's like, yes, these are just thoughts in my head, but if you take a step back, really, what is reality? Reality is my perception of it. So, yes, these thoughts, like these, these intrusive thoughts, these thought loops, these anxiety loops that we find ourselves caught in, yes, they are just thoughts. Yes, they are just in our heads. But the entirety of the universe is just in our heads, because the universe, reality, is just how we as humans interact with it. So at some point, you have to kind of pretzel your brain into thinking, my thoughts aren't real, but they are the most real things that I have.
It's the only things you really have, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, so that's one of the, because that's one of the things that we were talking about before we got on, or one of the things that we that I was thinking of is, you had asked me, do I see spiritualism or mysticism having a place in the academic scientific community, and it's a central question, because there's a lot of things that we can't explain that are really and truly just our perception of things. And academic scientists have a really, really hard time with that concept, because what is science at its core? It's our way, the human way of trying to explain natural phenomenon. Well, if thoughts aren't real, then how are these things occurring? So there has to be some weight given to that experience, that spiritual experience, that mystical experience. And it's borne out, the importance of these things is borne out in research. So there was I think it was in 2017 or 2018, the Hopkins group published what was up to then a seminal work with the induction of mystical experiences using psychedelics. It's like, well, it turns out that some of the long-term benefit is directly correlated to a person having this mystical type experience, this transcendental like experience. So, like, one, from a pharmaceutical standpoint, the Western Western medicines, what am I trying to think of? The epitome of Western medicine is isolating a compound and then giving just that compound to humans in order to do drug trials. Well, it doesn't really work for things like cannabis. It doesn't really work for things like mushrooms, because there's a lot of stuff in there that it will only work if you include all of it. Well, Western medicine doesn't really like that, because we can't isolate variables. When you're designing drug trials, you typically want to be able to say, this is safe because I have tested every number of iterations in a human and it didn't produce XYZ. Well, it's really hard to say that when you say, well, I gave a human a drug that actually contains 13 active chemicals, and we can't really tell, if chemical 2 or chemical 4, chemical 10 is the thing that's actually responsible. But when you put them all together, it produces this great result. And it's just this level of I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but
No,
it's
that's all
just
right. I'm
this.
enjoying the conversation. You got me
It,
mesmerized here, man. I'm enjoying this.
it's just this. Academic scientists are not generally comfortable with ambiguity. So, generally speaking, we want to be able to say definitively this causes this or this doesn't cause this. And it goes back to the whole, spirituality, mysticism. It's something that academic scientists can't measure, can't quantify. So they have a very hard time saying this is really important, but I can't tell you why. I personally, just from experience, very much think that we should include these types of experiences and include that aspect of the therapy, because it's what it is. We should include that aspect of the therapy in our studies, because the results bear out their importance. How to actually get people to come on board with that's the $1,000,000 question.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. How do we get people to acknowledge this? And I mean,
I mean,
mostly we're talking the
there is a
government,
way
right?
to do it. You just give the drug to everybody and say, "Look, you have your own experience. Now you see why it's important."
Yeah. If it was, but I mean, I don't know. There's not enough education out there. There's that stigma, the stigma of the magic mushroom.
Honestly, what I think would be amazing, and please, dear God, DEA, don't come hunt me down for this. This is just purely in joke. I feel stupid that I have to say this, but it
Well,
would
if we're
be
gonna hunt you, they
amazing.
might hunt me then.
Well, oh God. But honestly, what would realistically need to happen is somebody would need to just put LSD in the water supply in Washington, D.C. and let everybody drink it and let everybody have this experience. And now all of a sudden, you can't have folks saying, no, drugs are bad. Drugs are bad, okay?
That's from South Park there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's up in Canada where I'm from. I'm up here in Canada, so
Oh
yeah,
my
that's
God. Dude, how about the Leafs just absolutely losing it last night?
that's it, eh?
Ah.
So I don't know. Did we touch on if you think it would ever have a a place in modern medicine? Did we make that specific or?
I absolutely think and hope and pray and with every fiber of my being, I hope that this becomes a staple of especially psychiatric medicine. Um, I mean, just there's so many things that this potentially helps with. I have to say potentially, um, but I mean, just even like taking psychiatry out of the equation. If we're just looking at the hard medicine, so to speak. It's like, well, I mean, there are fantastic drug trials right now where they're giving DMT in the setting of acute ischemic stroke, and folks are it's promoting neuroplasticity, and it's folks are getting better. It's the same concept when you give psilocybin to traumatic brain injury or to stroke. You increase neuroplasticity, and these folks are getting better. It's what accounts for having having improvement of red green color blindness while using psychedelics. It's folks that have sensory neural deafness for years, and all of a sudden, after one, after a trip, they're hearing frequencies that they previously couldn't hear before. It's real. There's a lot of stuff about the brain that we just don't understand in general, and all of a sudden these things which we don't understand very much are causing reactions that, according to our understanding of the hard science, shouldn't happen, but they are. And then you take even neuro stuff out of the equation. It turns out that these alkaloids have fantastic anti-inflammatory properties, pain relieving properties. So now you've opened up the world of chronic pain. Now you've opened up the world of autoimmune disorders. Like there's so many opportunities for this class of drugs to play a role in medicine, and it's an absolute travesty that we as researchers and we as patients don't have the opportunities to really interact with and experiment with these drugs, especially given the fact that for the vast majority of us, if taken in the right setting, they're pretty benign in terms of physical effects. So I really don't see a reason other than political and financial control that these drugs would be held back. Unfortunately, political and financial control are the things that drive the world. So until that generation and folks that think like that generation dies off, it's going to be a slow road.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you were talking about all that stuff happening and going on, but it's all pushed under the rug. Like you don't read about anything like that, or like you said, it's all about the mighty dollar, but you don't hear anything like a normal person like me would never know that all this is going on. And I wonder why they're not making it public, like to let everybody
It's
know that this is what we're
the
doing.
the unfortunate truth is protecting the status quo is the number one job of the folks in power, because remember, the status quo is what has given them their power. So until that person in power has a personal connection to it, nothing will change. So this goes to show why in Texas, like conservative, super conservative ground zero, all of a sudden they're now talking about and actually approving MDMA drug trials. Well, it turns out a politician's brother has PTSD, and he went for an ayahuasca ceremony, and now all of a sudden he goes, "Oh, hey, these things might really be good." Yeah, no shit. It's just that it's now affecting you. So now you think it's all of a sudden it's okay. It's like, come on, man, blow it out your ass.
Well, yeah,
And it's the
because
same
what is
thing.
it? The Eastern, what was it? The Eastern world, they've been using it for
Yeah.
thousands of years, right? Thousands, and well, probably longer than that. So
Well, here the Catholic Church was single-handedly responsible for stamping out all of anything having to do with the psilocybin mushrooms since the 1500s. They single-handedly. So I'm Dominican and Puerto Rican. So all of Central and South America, there have been literal genocides that have been undertaken solely to keep the knowledge of these organisms away from folks, because again it goes back to power. If I am the bishop of a diocese and I'm telling you that the only way to talk to God is through me, and therefore I am the thing that influences everything, all of a sudden you get a farmer saying, "Nah, screw that, I can talk to God, just give me 2 hours and I'll be right there." All of a sudden you lose that power. All of a sudden you don't have that moral high ground to stand on. So what do? You get rid of it. And that's realistically what happened in the 60s and 70s with the enactment of the Controlled Substances Act and Tricky Dick Nixon declaring war on drugs. It was all about power. It had nothing to do with the actual drugs.
It seems like maybe they need to eat some mushrooms and kill that ego.
Oh, I wish. Just see the previous comment about putting LSD in the water supply.
Yeah. I don't think we should revisit that. We'll just leave that where it is, and we'll keep pushing forward here. I'm not. I remember something about the Eastern culture. There was a lady. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, and she used to give mushrooms as a. I can't remember her name. It was a long time ago. So fuck. Let's move on. I'm not gonna remember. I remember reading something, and then they shunned her. I don't know her name, but she was like an elder lady in one of the villages or something.
Oh, Maria Sabina?
I can't remember the name. I just remember leafing through some articles about it.
Yeah, so it was I think this is who you're talking about. It was Maria Sabina. She's the curandera in Mexico that introduced Aldous Huxley and R. Gordon Wasson, not Huxley, R. Gordon Wasson to mushrooms, and he came back and wrote an op-ed in Time magazine, and that area was then flooded by tourists that wanted to experience this, and the village then ended up essentially outcasting her, because they're like, no, you're getting all these people to come here, and they're ruining everything. And so she, to this, or not to this day, but when she would sit down for interviews, that would be that was one of her life's greatest regrets, is that she introduced this guy to the mushroom, and then he kind of, cat was out of the bag. If I remember correctly, she wishes that it had never happened, which I 100% understand, and I can sympathize with her. But there's a very large part of me that can't, because we're sitting here talking about it because it happened, solely because it happened. And we have this beautiful area of science and medicine that would not exist without that happy mistake.
Yeah, I'd like to open the floor, and if anybody would like to call in and join the conversation, talk with us a little bit. So in your opinion, are they addictive? Psychedelic drugs?
So let me explain. So the short answer is these are absolutely not habit forming compounds at all. You don't get withdrawals when you stop using them. They don't cause cravings. So from a traditional physiologic standpoint, no, these are not addictive. However, this is the same thing that happens with cannabis. This is the same thing that happens with really almost anything you can think of. They're absolutely are subject to the crutch effect, meaning we all know these people that they use these substances to essentially run away from their problems. And so they will rely on these to essentially start either psychologically proving to themselves that they don't have, XYZ issue, or every time I have an issue, I just want to take a small dose so that I feel that sense of euphoria, and then I don't have to deal with my problems. So you can become psychologically dependent on them. But from a physical standpoint, no, these are not habit forming. But again, folks, and we unfortunately all know these people where it becomes their entire persona. the overnight microdosing guru. Like, yeah, that's kind of a form of an addiction, at least the way I see it. It's like, if someone has to change their entire persona to all of a sudden, make themselves fit in with it, probably not the thing for them. They probably got other issues going there. But these are from like, speaking as a doctor, I think these are some of the absolute safest compounds you can give a human.
Microdose. What? Well, I think my dog got out. Can you give me 1 second?
Yeah, you're good,
Sorry,
man.
guys. What? Okay. Oh man. Sorry to interrupt the show, guys. I started. I heard dogs
You're good,
barking.
man.
I thought my dog got out. They're there.
Oh.
Okay. Oh man, my heart started going. So, like microdosing. What would you, in your opinion, what would be the best way to microdose, like schedule wise?
Oh, that's a really good question.
That's one that many people ask, and I know there's no like scientific, like actual.
Yeah, it's so I think the reason that it's hard to like, legitimately hard to answer this question is, number one, we don't fully understand what's actually happening at the chemical level. Number two, we really don't have any hard data with regards, like, we there just hasn't been enough work done to say, A, is it safe to do this long term? B, assuming that it is safe to do long term, what actually happens long term? Like, is there a ceiling to this effect? Is there a schedule at which we see tolerance build up? So it's really tough to answer the question because we don't have all of those answers. But what I will typically advise folks is to start with the Fadiman protocol, simply because of how it was thought out. So Fadiman, for those that don't know, is a researcher. It's not like an acronym or anything. His name is Fadiman. He didn't divide, like, we call it the Fadiman protocol, but if you actually talk to him, he didn't devise it as a microdosing protocol. He was trying to figure out a way to dose for his clinical trial, and there was no schedule that had ever been thought up. So he was just thinking of it purely from a data collection standpoint of, I'll give it on day one. Person can record their experience. We'll hold it off on day two so that we can try to evaluate this whole afterglow effect, and then hold off on day three because we want to see if there are any changes when the drug is completely out of your system, and just go that way. The reason that I think that this is a good approach is because there is such diversity in our neurochemistry that you can line up 100 people and you're probably going to get 95, 96 different experiences. So it's absolutely not one size fits all. This is very much, you have to see what your brain likes. And so that's why I think the Fadiman protocol is at least a good place to start. For folks that have a good bit of experience on these substances, I think what ends up working well for folks is something like a 3 on 2 3 on 2 off schedule. But the bottom line is, it sounds like a complete cop out, but it's real. You really have to experiment and figure out what works best for you.
So as far as like what are they called? Brain fart. Oh, I forgot. Fuck.
It's okay.
I would just had the question. Now I'm like, what the fuck? Um, what do they call it when it's like tolerance? There it is. Fuck
Yeah,
sake, man. You ever get that where you got it in your head and then all of a sudden you're
all
gonna
the
say
time,
it and
man.
it just fucks off on the fucking bastard thought. Anyway, as far as tolerance, like how do you think that goes?
So there's a few aspects to this. There's what's called a chemical refractory period, and that goes more towards like the actual what's called an action potential of a neuron, and I'll explain that in a second. And then the other side of this is it has to do with what's called pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. So, meaning, what does the drug do to my body versus what does my body do to the drug? So, from a chemical refractory standpoint, this is the concept that so action potentials, like, just think about it as a thought or an action, can only travel one way, like unidirectionally, down the axon of a neuron. It can only flow one way. And what ends up happening is that as that information flows down the axon, it does so by changing the electrical potential of the membrane. And what the reason that these impulses can only travel one way is because the electrical change in the membrane behind following that action potential is so large that it prevents anything from going backwards. So same thing kind of happens with psychedelics in that I only have a finite amount of neurotransmitters. And if I've already fired them off, it doesn't really matter. Like if I take the same amount or take less, it's not enough stimulation to cause it to fire again. So this is what explains, like, say that I have, I take a 3 gram trip on Monday. This is what prevents me from being able to take a trip on Tuesday unless I take substantially more. And even then, if I do take substantially more, the degree of the trip, so to speak, will probably be diminished. And that's because I only have a certain amount of neurotransmitters to actually fire off. Now, on the other side, or the other part of this is these drugs can build up in your system. This is one of the big questions that we have is how much does it build up in your system? Where in your system does it build up? How long does it take to clear? Because yes, you can have this stuff building to huge astronomical levels in your body tissues, but if your body clears it in 24 hours, well, who the hell cares? Because you're about to start from zero every 24 hours. The issue is we don't have that information. So to answer the question about tolerance, it's 2% scientific data that we can rely on and 98% experimentation, intuition, and fuck it, let's find out.
Well, it makes sense because for the past, I don't know, say I've been eating mushrooms for about 14 months and I do it every 2 weeks and I do quite a large dose. But lately I've been like halfway through my trip when I'm actually, I'm up, I'm getting drink and, walking around. I'll go down and I'll get more and I'll eat them. The only thing that I find that happens for me is when the trip, like I don't re-peak. I've already peaked. I can't re-peak
Mm-hmm.
again. So when I when I'm coming down, I just find that it helps my brain shut off a little easier because before when I wasn't taking that second dose, when I came down, my mind, I couldn't sleep. Like it would take me, an
Yeah.
hour, 2 hours to get to sleep. But now I've noticed since I've took that second dose, maybe halfway through, or maybe a little bit more, I've noticed when I come down now, I can turn the lights out or the TV off, and I can actually just close my eyes and go to sleep. So when you were mentioning about like how you have so many, what is it, brain cells?
Yeah,
What was it?
neurons.
Yeah, neurons. That's it. Yeah. So because I do such a large dose in the beginning, I've used up all those neurons, so I can't redose again during the night. It just helps me sleep when it's time to go to sleep.
No, and it's I'm glad that you brought this up, because frankly speaking, from a pure, like, biochemistry standpoint, neurochemistry standpoint, like that shouldn't make sense, but it does. So this
Yeah.
is one of the things that's like, yeah, I would love to be, I would love to sound super confident and tell you this is these are the 5 reasons that XYZ happens. But the bottom line is, in a lot of these scenarios, we know just as much as you do, probably less. you know and
Well,
it's
I'm
a
down for any studies. If anybody wants to do studies, I'm like I said,
hell yes.
I've been doing it for 14 months now, and I started off doing I think I started off about 2 grams, and then I worked my way up over the 14 months, and now I do every 2 weeks. I do 8 grams to 10 grams. So I
Holy
think I've
cow.
yeah, I think I've but it might go back to that tolerance, right? Like I've kind of,
Yeah, it
because
could. It could.
I didn't just start off, oh, I'm gonna do fucking 10 grams, and you know, I worked my way up slowly and slowly. So now I'm anywhere from 7 to 10, and then like I said, I go later on through the night and I go down, and then I'll take some more. But that helps me sleep. That's it's weird how it works, but yeah, I'm here. I'm an open book. So
What
I'm
what would be interesting is to see what happens if you take a 4 week break instead of a 2 week break in between doses. And
I
then,
could do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, and this, I'm saying, like, this is experimentation. It's, well, we have an established pattern, so now let's start varying off that pattern and see what happens.
Okay. And like, what kind of notes should I be like? What should I be mentally like notes? What should I be thinking about? Like the
So,
difference.
like,
Like
the things that I would say. So, number one, there are no rules to this, because we're essentially making it up as we go along. So anytime I am thinking about, like, a new thought exercise, or trying to design a study, and pretty much I think that every person in science, regardless of kind of discipline or specialty, thinks this way, is, if we don't know where this is going to go, if we don't know what the results are going to be, it's best to err on the side of caution and collect all of the data. And you can sort it when the experiment is over. So realistically, probably 80% of the data that I collect in any given experiment, and I'm using the term experiment loosely here, but 80% at least of the data that I collect has absolutely no bearing on the final result or the final analysis. But the point is, I don't know which 80% of that data will be irrelevant. So it could be the most minute thing that becomes the most relevant, or it could be the most obvious thing that you're like, oh my God, I guarantee this is going to have the biggest effect. And it turns out it has no effect at all. So,
okay.
bottom line, to answer your question, is just write down and think about whatever you think at that point in time is going to be most important to you. The biggest thing, though, is whatever you start collecting or whatever you start focusing on, keep it consistent. That's the biggest thing.
So like what you're saying is if I'm doing a study, I have to, like, in my mind, I have to figure out like what it's exactly gonna be on. Like,
Well,
is it the
I'm saying like
tolerance or
yeah,
like
so like if on your first quote unquote experiment you ask yourself 5 questions, or you're looking at, you know, 5 data points, from now on, always collect those 5 data points. You can collect any number of other things, but at the very least you want to collect those 5 things over and over and over again. Because what you're looking for is a pattern. You're looking to establish a pattern. You're looking to identify patterns. And if you collect the same pieces of information over and over and over again, that's how you establish a pattern. But if you're not consistent with it, then you have no ability, no shot in hell of identifying a pattern.
makes sense. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on outside of what we've discussed?
No, man, this has been far ranging, and I love it. I don't think I think we started out with like 5 questions we were going to talk about, and then you just let my verbal diarrhea take over.
Yeah, that's that's what we're here for, though. You know, I'm here. I want to get all the information out to the people that listen, and you know that's what you know. You're the man of the hour. It's your show right now. I'm just here guiding it.
Well, I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. I liked it.
All right. Well, we'll shut down the show for today then, and I would love to have you back on.
Anytime, man. This is
Yeah.
fun.
All right. Absolutely. We had a dog chase. I went running around. It was a it was a crazy show, man. But I
was
thoroughly
exciting.
enjoyed it. Yeah, it was. It was. So, yeah, that was great, man. We'll have a talk, and I'll get you back on the show for sure, 100%.
Well, thanks, buddy. Anytime.
Yeah.
Seriously,
Yeah.
just let me know.
Oh, absolutely. And if there's anything you want to pick my brain about, like, you know, as far as the psychedelic stuff, and just let me know. And like I said, I'm an open book, and I'll talk about it. So
Oh, I definitely want to pick your brain on that stuff. I want to hear. I want all the smoke.
yeah, where I started from, and 'cause,
Yes.
you know, I'll all right, maybe we'll have to have a podcast on that one.
Yeah, we're gonna do one with. Oh, here's gonna be a really good one. You, me, and Dark Matter, and the show is gonna be you talking about your trips and your observations, and then he and I get to nerd out and ask you all sorts of questions.
Absolutely, I'm down for that. We got to schedule that one as soon as possible, man.
Oh yeah, man.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Powers for being on the show. It was a fun-filled, exciting show. You can find us on any platform where you listen to your favorite podcast. Hope to catch you on the next edition in the Fifth Dimension. Stay tripping. Much love.